How about when the Arabs around you, the countries around you, actually proclaim that we need to drive all the Jews into the ocean and kill all of them, and then they actually go and do that, and then what do you do when that happens?
So at this point, you're talking about a hypothetical.
No,
And
no,
we've gone.
that actually happened. There are consequences to when, it's obviously not all the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership doesn't represent the Palestinians because they're on their 11th year of their 4-year term. However, when your nation or the representation of your nation, declares war 3 times and acts and tries to destroy Israel, and then Israel wins, the consequences of those wars shouldn't be blamed on the country that was attacked.
So I don't think that's a very good comparison because you've reverted the asymmetry that's present there.
No, but when it first started, there was no asymmetry. The Israelis didn't really have that strong of a force. In fact, the Arabs were stronger. They had militaries, they had countries.
I think the asymmetry there was that I'm under the impression that the British established the state of Israel.
They didn't.
Right.
They just pulled out, and the UN decided that there'd be 2 states, one for the Arabs and one for the Jews. The British had nothing to do. They just pulled out and left.
I just find it very hard to believe that has always been a symmetrical, that started off as a symmetrical situation.
I would say it was advantage for the Arabs. The Arabs had stronger, they believed in pan-Arabism once, so they all were united and helped each other. They had established armies, established countries, economies. The Jews were either Jews living poorly in the land, the British Mandate of Palestine, or Jews that had just survived the Holocaust, or Jews that were kicked out from Arab countries that had just came back to their homeland. So it's actually asymmetrical, you're right, but in the other favor. Now, today, it's for sure that Israel is more powerful.
That feels a little bit iffy to me.
The conflict never was called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was the Israeli-Arab conflict. It was only after 1967 that it became the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because in 1964, Yasser Arafat decided to call the Levantine Arabs Palestinians, and only then were they considered Palestinians.
When people are speaking about anti-Zionism, their opposition is to the asymmetrical and imperial subjugation of the Palestinian people.
So can you explain to me why you use the word imperial?
Why I think it's imperialism?
Yeah. Why you think that the Jews coming back to the land, establishing their state, although there might be, conflict with ethnic people living in the region, why you consider Jews living in Judea imperialism?
I don't think I said Jews living in Judea is imperialism, but I think it's valid to classify the Israeli state as it currently stands as an imperialist state.
Can you explain why?
In the same sense that the United States of America is an imperialist state.
Okay, I would actually agree with you because the people from Europe came and took away land that wasn't theirs. However, Jewish land, right, Judea, belonged to the Jews. And
so the question is it an imperialist state?
Okay, so how is it an imperialist state?
How is it imperialist? I would say probably the use of force is a pretty big factor.
Well, if there's a war and you're a country, and you're not an imperialist country, but you have an army and you use your army to defend yourself, is that by definition imperialist because you have an army and you can defend yourself?
Using an army to maintain national borders, I would call that an imperialist state.
So if Tibet was a country again, okay, and it used its military to defend China from being an imperialist country and trying to take away Tibet from them, you would call that imperialism?
Yes.
So any country defending itself is imperialism?
With
the military?
Any nation state that is enforcing its boundaries with a military, for me, that's essentially imperialistic.
So how would Israel or the Jewish people survive if they didn't have a military and didn't use that military to defend themselves?
So I think there's this idea that a lot of people have, which is that everyone in the world wants to kill us except for us, so we have to defend ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the trick with that idea is that if you have multiple people that have that idea, then you just get intractable conflicts forever, which is why the world is the way that it is.
How about when the Arabs around you, the countries around you, actually proclaim that we need to drive all the Jews into the ocean and kill all of them, and then they actually go and do that, and then what do you do when that happens?
So at this point, you're talking about a hypothetical.
No,
and
no,
we've gone-
that actually happened. Like all the Arab countries, there are recordings. You can research it. All the Arab armies surrounding Israel and the leaders of what is today called the Palestinians said, "We must kill all the Jews and drive them into the ocean."
Okay, so I think what's hard is that there's so much history of antagonism. So I'm trying to not go too far in that direction. And what I'm really asking is about the imperialist state of Israel. Like, to me, that's just, it's kind of a problem.
Yeah, but I keep trying to understand why use imperialism, and then you told me that if any country has borders and uses force or military to define those borders, then that's imperialism. But I asked you, what happened if you have a country of Jews, right, or a civilization of Jews that want to defend themselves from an actual force trying to murder them? Would you not, like, if your family was being murdered, would you not try and find a way to defend them? And the act of defending them would be considered imperialist to you?
No, so what I'm trying to say is that the nation state is a defunct organ. So it's not so much to say that, like, oh, like, we shouldn't have a nation state so that, like, all of the other nation states can gang up on it. It's a criticism of nation states in general. Okay.
No, I understand that you might disagree with the formation of countries, and maybe I think you think we should all be...
Well, it's not so much with the formation, it's more with the violent subjugation.
Okay, so, but it's, you see, like, Israel's creation wasn't a violent subjugation of anyone. It was a creation of a country, and then there was a war, and the consequence of those wars led to the situation that we're in. So it's very easy to just take away certain elements of, like, history where, 1948, all the Arab countries surrounding Israel attacked Israel, and then saying, well, we lost the war, and, like, a lot of people were displaced and a lot of people died. Well, first of all, on both sides, people were displaced, both sides, people died.
Yeah, so
However,
we're getting mired in history again, and this is why it's
But history, I think, is very
conflict.
important.
I do think history is very important, but the issue is that history is necessarily interpreted.
Okay,
So
I agree with that.
if we're interpreting history through different ideological lenses, then we're going to have an intractable discussion.
But we need to, like, not erase historical, like, facts.
I'm not trying to erase historical facts. What I'm trying to say is that the Israeli state is an imperialist state.
And so you define it as an imperialist state just because as a military defending itself?
It's not so much about... Like, I don't think that's a necessary and sufficient condition, but I do think that is a condition that applies. I mean, there's other conditions that go into imperialism. Usually, there's maybe some amount of jurisdiction over people that have been subjugated. So, like, for example, I don't think that the average Palestinian has free reign as an Israeli citizen.
Well, I can touch on that subject. The Arabs living in Israel have full equal rights. Those living in the West Bank and in Gaza are different, obviously.
Yeah.
The same way Jews cannot enter areas in the West Bank, Palestinians can't enter areas in Israel unless they have a permit, right? But those, conditions were set by the Palestinian Authority, who voted, during the Oslo Accords that we wanted to separate it to Area A, B, and C. So it was actually not something that was taken over. It was something that was agreed upon by the Palestinian Authority, which is a current situation that I personally am completely against. I don't think there should be a wall dividing any peoples. I think we should be able to travel freely, right? Yes. However, I cannot take out the fact that the situation that we're living in today is a cause of the wars that were created and the policies that both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority's government decided to present. I completely disagree with the current state of affairs today and the conflict and the status quo. I think we would both agree on that.
Yes.
However, I can't take out the historical relevance as to what happened and how we got to the situation today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the trick, is that if we're not going to do that, where do we end?
I think,
at what point is historical relevance no longer relevant?
I mean, I think it's always relevant unless, like, we're talking about where we're going towards the future. And where we're going towards the future has to do more with solving the situations for Palestinians and for Israelis, right? If we ask, like, what are the top 10 things that the Palestinians need in order to feel that they've, achieved, they're no longer humiliated, no longer controlled, that they have access to electricity and to water and to resources and have opportunity, like, that's what they want. And you ask, like, Israelis what they need to feel safe. They want to have a Jewish state because that's part of their self-determination. And if you actually ask, like, the top 10 and top thing, they actually don't contradict. I think the problem starts when we present the image as if you're pro-Israel, you must be anti-Palestinian, or if you're pro-Palestinian, you must be anti-Israel.
Yeah, and I think that's just a natural feature of being a human, is that we're tribal animals, and we split into these identities as group identities, and then because there's an in-group and an out-group, we just systematically discriminate, because that's just how we're built.
Like us versus them type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a very natural mentality to fall into if you aren't particularly conscious. And I think it's an intractable conflict because of that. Like, it's psychological and it's implicit. And I don't think that... Like, I basically agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I don't think that what I think in my head when I think anti-Zionism is what you think in your head when you think anti-Zionism. Like, for me, when I'm thinking about anti-Zionism, I'm more thinking about...
Anti-conflict, anti-Palestinian suffering, probably.
Yeah. Like, if you look at, like, the history of the Jewish people, it's a history mostly of subjugation. So, like, on that basis, I think we should all be anti-Zionists.
Well, Zionism doesn't represent subjugation. I think we should be
But
anti-status quo.
Yeah, so
but let me tell you something.
Zionism as an ideal concept doesn't represent subjugation, but I think Zionism as it's put into practice by Zionists generally does.
Yeah, but that's unfair to just take out the actions of all the Arab sides of what they did, by declaring war, trying to kill Jews, and constantly killing Jews.
But I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not condoning
it
at all.
But it's saying, like, you're not okay, Zionism to Israelis, which is, we're talking about two players here. It's like one's the protagonist of their movie and the other's the antagonist. On the other hand, it's like the protagonist and antagonist who are kind of living in two different movies. However, Israelis who believe in their self-determination are consider themselves Zionists, right? So if one side consider themselves Zionists and the other side consider themselves Palestinian, if one side is saying we're anti-Zionist, is we're anti-you. Regardless as to how you may mean Zionism, because you're talking about the current state of affairs, when you're saying you're anti-Zionist or you believe in anti-Zionism, you're saying to a whole group of people that are representing of the Israeli country and the Israeli people that you're anti their right to exist.
It's a political stance, generally speaking, in the circles that I see it, against a particular kind of nation state, specifically the nation state of Israel, and it's specifically in the context of, like, larger sociopolitics, like the United States relationship with Israel. I don't think you can abstract Israel or Zionism from that connection.
Well, I'm a Zionist and I'm completely against the U.S. foreign aid to Israel.
But I don't think... So, who or what Zionists are? Complicated notion. All concepts super complicated, super fuzzy.
But what Zionism is a very clear, like, one-line definition that has nothing to do with, like, the current political structure of the conflict.
Oh, I see. You're a Platonic realist. You believe that concepts have real, clear, firm, one-line definitions.
No, I think that Zionism in itself, to Jews, to those who call themselves Zionists, means one specific thing, and by those who proclaim that they are anti-Zionist, they take it and they define it by something else. And I think we should define Zionism by Zionists, right? Which is the right for Jews to self-determine. Now, there is a conflict there, and there's a context to that conflict.
Some people are defining it on that conceptual level like you are, and some other people are defining it on the basis of imperialist aggression.
But again, you use the word imperialist, and it's kind of problematic to use the word imperialist when we're talking about a native people self-determining on their homeland. But do you see how it's a problem when we want to try, because the goal, regardless as to what we agree with or disagree with, we would both agree that we want to see a better future in that land, right? Both for Palestinian and Israelis, right? And when we take an entire group of people and we say that our movement is to be against their right to self-determination, right, which is their word Zionism, then how do we actually move forward or try and build anything from there? People who are pro-Palestinian should talk about the struggles that Palestinians go through, right? We shouldn't ignore that, but we shouldn't talk about them as kind of a way to kind of deconstruct Israel's right to exist or the Jewish people's right to self-determination. And that's kind of what anti-Zionism is.
Well, so there's a difference between the Jewish people's right to self-determination and Israel's right to exist. Israel is a nation state.
What's the difference?
It's the difference between a nation state and the people that the nation state represents.
But their way that Jews want to have a right to exist and the way that they practice their self-determination is by creating a country. That's their way, and it's for nobody to define.
That's typically what humans do, is they create nation states, at least since Sumeria, like 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Yeah, that's what we've been doing.
But it's no one's.
The creation of a nation state is imperialism.
Okay, so you're against like the creation of Tibet.
I'm against the creation of nation states. The intractability of the conflict is a result of the nation state. If you look at
I don't think
the
so.
intractability of every conflict is a result of nation states.
You have countries that live fine together.
Because the conflicts only happen between nation states.
No, they also happen between people. Like there's no nation state of Palestine currently, right? There's an area that's a territory, area A, B, and C divided, and you have a Palestinian Authority, but there's no country.
If I were to assert that the nation of Israel not just has a right to self-determination, but also has a right to this land, then, like, on the basis of that reasoning, I should be arguing that, like, black people in America have a right to carve out a section and say, this is ours, and then enforce that with the military.
Well, black people come from many different countries and tribes. Yeah, but
like,
first of all,
why don't we have a right to self-determination?
Well, Jews are one people, right? Black people are many different people that come from different tribes and different places in Africa.
Jews
and
are many people.
No, they're one nation. Like even Ashkenazi,
diaspora,
yeah, right? But they're all descend from one people, from one nation, from one place, from one thing.
All humans are descended from one.
Okay,
people.
sure, but humans are not a nation, right?
Why not?
Well, we're a species, but we're not a nation, and like. You know,
but so I guess what I'm trying
like Native
to say,
Americans are a nation, right? Like you couldn't like take away their identity because their identity is very important for them.
So what I'm saying is that I do believe that nations have a right to self-determination, but I think part of that means not using the use of force to subjugate another nation's right to self-determination.
I would agree with that, but that's not what happened, right? What happened is that Israel declared its independence. They didn't kick out anybody, but right after it declared its independence, the same day, there was a war that was waged by all the surrounding Arab countries.
So we agree that the right to self-determination does not include the right to subject another.
Absolutely.
But the issue that I'm pointing to, is, like, just abstracted a little bit from history, is just that once you go from asserting the right to self-determination to asserting the right to occupation of...
Or liberation.
It's occupation.
Or liberation. You liberated your land from the British, that was your homeland. It's like you have a house that you built and you bought and it's your property, and all of a sudden someone takes it away.
There are more foreclosed homes in the United States than there are homeless people. If all of the homeless people liberate those homes...
No, but those homes weren't theirs to begin with.
What I'm saying is occupation, liberation, it's a matter of semantics.
No, but those homeless people, that wasn't their home.
But what I'm pointing to is...
Like the Jewish people, that was their home.
So they liberate... a lot of people. The difference between occupation...
Yeah, but it wasn't the native land of other people.
Semantic difference.
The individuals could have considered that their homes.
We're arguing about a semantic difference, though.
But like when you say occupation, it's like it's crazy to me that the Jews can occupy the land of Judea. Like, how could you occupy your own homeland? But the fact of the matter is, the last people that actually lived there that were native to this land were the Jews, and they also kept a constant presence on that land throughout the colonial empires that existed.
But like we are... I think that... But what I'm saying is the distinction can be made, at least on a conceptual level, between a people and their right to self-determination as like a society and a culture, and like saying that like Group A gets these 7 acres, and like not only do they have a right to these 7 acres, but like it's an exclusive right to these 7 acres, right? Like there's a, I think that is kind of the status quo of the world, and it's not working for us at all. Like, you can have self-determination while you're still mixing with other people. It doesn't have to be like an exclusive right to the land. So my point is that there's a difference between saying that a people has a right to self-determination and saying that a people has a right to land. Whether it's occupation or liberation doesn't really matter.
Would you agree that
Because
self-determination depends on the people we're talking about? Like, for example, self-determination for Native Americans, they don't believe in creating a country because in their culture they believe that land owns man and not that man owns land. Mm-hmm. However, there is definitely a certain area, physical geographic area that is native to them that they believe they should have a right to self-determination and also control for their own people. So different peoples have different levels of self-determination, and usually almost always land is involved. Right, I don't know of any native people that have.
I mean, that's kind of the substrate to human existence, is that there's a planet, and we exist on the surface of this planet. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's a fact of existence.
Yeah, but like people can live in one place and then move to another, and for them it doesn't matter. But for others, even if they're physically torn apart from the land, they always feel the need to come back because that land is more than just like a piece of land.